Hey everyone, on here, and let's try this again. Take two, as they say. There's nothing like having to, last minute try to find a video card because your video card is all filled up and all of those fun things that go along with recording things. So anyways, we are set and we are here, and I've got a big topic I want to delve into today for this month's video. And I'm going to be delving into the Paris Climate Accord. So we get a lot of information to cover in that. A lot of people are not aware of what that's all about. I'm going to be touching just really briefly on cryptocurrency, the whole thing that's going down with Bitcoin. And then also I want to delve a little bit into control without consent, also known as coercion. So I've actually got some pretty big stuff I want to delve into, so bear with me through this. And a lot of people have expressed to me they really love having some of these deeper digs. They really love having me take the time to actually explain things, and it helps people. And then I will provide the links as well so you can go and look up your information, because even as much as I can delve into in these videos, there's a lot more information out there, and you'll probably will make some of your own connections in the process of reading things yourself, going through things yourself, and taking a look at it. Now, the Paris Climate Accord is one of the many things that Biden is reversing of Trump's right now. So Trump backed out of the Paris Climate Accord, Biden went back into it. And there's so many things that play into this, from Agenda 2030 to globalist agendas to elitist agendas to CCP agendas to all of these different things. And so it really is a touchy area. And when Trump pulled out of it, it wasn't that he didn't care about the environment. And I'm going to make some points as we go along on these things to help you kind of grasp more about this, because so many people think, well, isn't that just all about saving the environment and reducing our greenhouse emissions and all of those aspects? And that's what they claim. That's what they want people to believe. That's the propaganda that they put out there. But that's not necessarily what they're about, and that's what we're going to explore into this and show. Now, one thing about the Paris Climate Accord is that it is an agreement that is within the UN. So it's actually like a subsection of the UN. It's like you have the UN that handles all of these different things, and then you'll have all of these different committees and agreements and things within the UN. And anytime I see something associated now with the UN, it's pretty much a big red flag to me that it's all about corruption. Without even having to look at things, it's probably got some heavy corruption, a lot of control. We know the UN has a lot of different things, from Illuminati connections to the elitist connections to the globalist connections. And, a great place to go look at all of that is Janet Ossebrand. She has put out a series of videos, The Fall of the Cabal, and then she's now done a sequel to The Fall of the Cabal. And her stuff is very well researched. If you haven't seen any of it, I suggest taking the time to go through all of them that she has. She has a 10-part series in the original one, and then the second series, she's taking smaller pieces. Well, she's taking more specific groups like the UN, Planned Parenthood, things like this. And she's really researched it out well. She's really brought a lot of factual information in to bring in and really show you how these organizations are working. So I will have that link in the comments for you so that you can look that up yourself. I've got the one for her for BitChute. That's probably one of the safest ones that you can go to, that it's not going to be banned on. So we will get that in there. So yeah, a lot of people do believe that the Paris Climate Accord is this big environmental thing. And that's where we get into a lot of trouble, because the environmental stuff is one of the next plays that are going to be getting hit. A lot of things are being done in the name of coming into zero emissions or in the name of saving the environment. And this is where the globalist agendas in particular are really going to come into play, because the globalists really like to use environmental stuff to gain power and control and to coerce people into what they want. So it's a way for them to play on their guilt, just like some of the Marxists and people like that play on race, and they play on dividing people by religion or belief or color of skin, things like that. The globalists like to use the environment. And this is where, you got Bill Gates' hands in a lot of this stuff that goes on with this. And a lot of people don't understand much about greenhouse gas emissions and how that plays into things. And why, again, what they're feeding us isn't necessarily the truth. And this is why we have to get in and dig deeper, because a lot of environmentalists, they take things right off the top. They take things that support the propaganda or are from the propaganda of the globalist. And they do things like they'll take certain studies or whatever, but they don't realize that those studies are bought and paid for by, for example, somebody like Bill Gates, who funds a program or an institution to do a particular study and get the results that they want and to say what they want and to give them the information to work with. They're very good at distorting things. And this really hurts me, because there's a lot of really smart environmental people out there. There's a lot of people who really do care, and they really do want to do the right thing, and they really do want to minimize their footprint. And this is where one of the things that they will automatically think we should be in the Paris Climate Accord. Well, the reality of it is that Trump, in his term, reduced emissions, whereas they were going up in other terms. And so, he was doing things naturally, and basically what he realized and what he said with this was, we don't need to be in the Paris Climate Agreement to be environmentally responsible, because the Paris Climate Agreement is just, in some ways, it's like a big slush fund for the elite. It really is. It's just a big slush fund to where they all join together and agree to promote certain stories and propaganda, and then they want the citizens of their countries to pay for it. And China, who's one of the biggest contributors to the emissions problem, is not even really contributing or giving much to it. And if you don't have a country like China who is going to do anything about their emissions, their greenhouse gases, then you're never going to get to that zero. I mean, getting to zero is not really possible, like they want everybody to believe, aspect, the 0 point area. And part of that is because nature, right? Sometimes there's forest fires and it is not man-created. And a lightning strikes and it starts a fire in a forest. That's going to create some greenhouse emissions, okay? Nature naturally works with some of the greenhouse emissions, and it is part of its natural cycle. So you're never going to totally get rid of it, no matter what you do. If we all stopped all of our human craziness and usage and pared down to really nothing, we would still have it. We would still have some. But nature can take care of its own. The things that come from nature can be taken care of, and nature knows how to deal with that. It's some of the other things that they don't want you to know about, and the more developed countries that play this bigger role into where all of this comes from. So, really what this is, when you get into it, they want you to believe, oh, this is such a good thing, and this is, it's going to limit global warming. Well, that's another link I'm going to put in there, because the person who was originally involved in the global warming aspects, his name was John Coleman, and he was one of the founders of the Weather Channel. And he shows that global warming doesn't exist. And as a lot of this started to come out, they had to change calling things global warming to climate change. Well, you know what? Nature naturally goes through this cycle of cold and hot and adjusting and bigger melts and then less melts. And people have taken and distorted this stuff and made it into something that's not. They saw an opportunity to say, oh, we can use this piece of information and scare everybody and make everybody afraid that the world is going to be destroyed and make them feel guilty for doing it, and then we'll tax them into poverty to correct the situation. It's just another area you see for the elite to get taxes, is really the pared down version of it all. And so, you know, when you look at what this is about, I mean, they say their goal is to limit global warming down to a certain level. It's, you know, they use the global this, global that a lot, which, you know, that's red flags, right? And it's to get countries to aim to reach global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions as possible. And I just want to throw something in there. A lot of the people that promote this type of thing, they're flying around in private jets. They're flying. They're, you know, I mean, they're doing some of the bigger contributors to things in here. So, you know, what they really want people to believe is that this is going to be about, you know, what they miss is one of the big things that the Paris Agreement is about. They present it as being about the environment, but what it says, and actually this comes right off of the UNFCCC website, so this is legal websites, okay? This isn't just off news someplace. It's about creating economic and social transformation. Okay, it's not about the environment. On their website it says implementation of the Paris Agreement requires economic and social transformation based on the best available science. Right there, you know that that is based on whatever science they want to use. That doesn't even necessarily mean facts. It means skewing statistics to create a story to support an agenda that they want to have you pay for. And they say it works on this 5-year cycle that's carried out by countries, and by 2020, all the countries who are supposed to submit their plans, they need a certain amount of countries, like 55 countries, on board, because they need a certain percentage of people to be able to support them in their rich lifestyles, really is what it comes down to. And, you know, it's saying we're going to agree to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in order to reach the goals of this agreement. And their long-term strategies, you know, they go on to say, you know, they don't even really get into it. They really don't. When you're just looking at the basic parts of the website. And it talks about countries supporting each other, but then it says, how are the countries supporting each other? Through finances, through technology, through capacity building. So again, this is not about the environment. This is about finances. This is about technology. This is about things that actually are destructive to the environment and not helping the environment. So this is about developing the capacity that, when you really get into the deeper layers, is the capacity for the elite to hold their status and to rule and to govern in a totalitarian way, and is about total control. It's about reforming and controlling the average person. So they want to, you know, do these tracking systems. There's tracking systems involved with it, all of this. So what I want to get into is actually going into the Paris Agreement and taking a look at some of the pieces of it for you, and just reading some of these pieces and giving you the insights of what they're really saying in this language. Because of course they're not going to come out and say, well, this is about restructuring your entire life and getting you to submit and to conform so that we can continue to have the lifestyle that we want, and we can continue to get richer and more powerful while you come into constraint and possible suffering and restriction and total control to us. I mean, that's the essence of it. So it says in pursuit of the objective of the conventions and being guided by the principles, including the principle of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of different national circumstances. So you see, they can use this climate change aspect to be the excuse for anything that they want, and they can connect it to all these national circumstances, to anything that they want to connect it to. So if they have an event that they want to cover up in some way, a mistake that they made, they can blame it on global warming. If they, for example, in California want to go out and start fires and have riots, they can blame it on global warming. And so they can put all these things into there based on the way that they have things worded. It says it's recognizing the need for an effective and progressive response to the urgent threat of climate change on the basis of the best available scientific knowledge. So again, they're operating by fear. They're talking about getting very aggressive and in the name of this climate change, which is nothing out of the ordinary from nature, and using the best available scientific knowledge. That translated means using the knowledge or the information they want to control the narrative. It says that it's about recognizing the specific needs and special circumstances of developing countries, especially those particularly vulnerable to adverse effects of climate change. And it says taking full account of the specific needs and special situations of the least developed countries with regard to funding and transfer of technology. So really what they're looking at here is, how do we get more affluent countries like the US to pay for us to increase technology, not to help the environment, not to feed more people, not to alleviate poverty, but to surveil, to monitor, to control, to track. Because if they can get the technology into the so-called less developed countries, they can literally track everybody on the planet. They can literally have this total control, and they're not far off from this. I mean, they could probably implement it now if they wanted to in a lot of ways, but they're not quite ready, but it is all being pushed forward for them. So this is really about, hey, we've got certain countries that right now we can't really control because they don't have all kinds of technology equipment there. And so we want to bring technology equipment into there. Okay? Recognizing the parties that may be affected not only by climate change, but also by the impacts of the measures taken in response to it. Emphasizing the intrinsic relationship that climate change actions, responses, and impacts have with equitable access to sustainable development and eradication of poverty. These are two really big keywords that they use all the time. Sustainable development, eradication of poverty. Okay, what they don't tell you about this is that they're not going to eradicate poverty. First of all, sustainable development to them is about putting you, and look up Agenda 2030 because it talks a lot about those aspects, but it is about putting you in these controlled cities that aren't even really cities. It's like a bubble. So like, I mean, talk about being isolated. They want you to believe that you're in this euphoria and you're kind of really living in like this bubble city. And it's only eradicating poverty in the sense that if you go along with the agenda. So what they're going to do is, if you don't go along with the agenda, they'll just get rid of you. If you do go along with the agenda and you want to be their slave, then you will do what they want you to do. And as a result, then they might give you some, digital currency. Okay, because digital currency is going to play into all of this as well. They want to move everything to a digital currency, because if they move to a digital currency, it comes into a central control where they can totally control everything. It's one push of the button to where, oh, you said the wrong thing. Oh, you asked a question that we don't want you to ask. Now we deduct from what you have to work with. So it's not an eradication of poverty. It's about control. And so they say that it's about recognizing the fundamental priority of safeguarding food security and ending hunger, and the particular vulnerabilities of food production systems to the adverse impacts of climate change. So now what they're getting into that they're not telling you in this is they're basically saying, oh, well, growing your own food or growing food has an adverse impact on the environment. So this is where we've already heard it. Gates has already come out with it over the last month. It will be lab food. You will get the food that we create for you and not actual food. It's not going to be actual food. It's going to be lab created food. He's already trying to alleviate all beef under this aspects of climate change. And, we know that this is not it. And I'll get into some of these aspects in a little bit, because I am going to get into the greenhouse gases on this. So, here again, they're not telling you the whole thing. They use these words that sound good, but they're not what they're not what they present themselves to be. It's kind of like somebody who says the right words, that says, oh, I really do care about you, and that's why I'm going to cut your leg off, because I care about you so much. Okay? It's not matching up. What they're actually doing and the words that they're using are just a disguise. And as we know about the corrupt, they have no problem lying. Lying is okay in their book with things. So they go on to say, taking into account the imperatives of a just transition of the workforce and the creation of decent work and quality jobs in accordance with nationally defined development priorities. In other words, you can no longer work any kind of job that you want. You will transition into what they want you to do. They're going to transition the whole workforce. So if they come along and they don't like, for example, the political affiliation of a company or an individual sole proprietor or an organic farmer, for example, they're going to say, sorry, you can't do that anymore because it's adversely affecting climate change. And though you need to go work in something else now. You need to do this other thing that is more in alignment with our priorities. And, when they're talking about their priorities, they're not talking about equality for the people. They're talking about their priorities to have control over everybody, their priorities to maintain power in the world. And you see, these are the pieces they leave out of the wording, out of the legal wording of things. These are the pieces that they don't really tell you whose priorities you're going to work for. They're not going to be your own, okay? Acknowledging that climate change is a common concern of humankind, parties should, when taking action to address climate change, respect, promote, and consider their respective obligations on human rights, the right to health, the rights of indigenous people, local communities, migrants, children, persons with disabilities, and people in vulnerable situations, and the right to development, as well as gender equality, empowerment of women, and intergenerational equity. So, first of all, oh my gosh. Okay, first of all, this is such a bunch of crock in so many ways. They're talking about dressing. Let me make it known. I am very pro the environment. I'm very pro working in harmony with nature. I'm very pro doing what we can to have a positive relationship with the earth and all of life on it. Okay, I'm not against things, and I don't consider myself a wasteful person. I live very conservatively. I try to, recycle things. I try to have very minimal trash, all of these things. I maximize my trips so that I can do lots of things, and all kinds of things that I try to do to work with things. But their obligations on human rights and the right to health, here again, they want you to believe that they're doing this for your health. They're right, but they're disrespecting all kinds of rights in the process. They're disrespecting rights of freedom. They're disrespecting basic human God-given rights in this process. They're not allowing you to choose what kind of environment you want to live in. They're not allowing you to choose what you will eat. They're not allowing you to live where you want to live. It's all going to come into these communities, this glass bubble kind of city aspect. And they want you to believe, well, we're doing this for, for the best of your health. Well, no, they're not. Injecting people with vaccines is not doing something that's in the best interest of their health, for example. And, there are people and there are times and there are places, and that's their business if they want a vaccine. I'm not going to go into that. But you see how they distort this? And what does gender equality have to do with climate change? Nothing. Nothing. Has nothing to do with it. Empowerment of women. It's not connected to climate change. These are narratives. These are all narratives. They want you to believe we're going to create this equal world. It is never going to be equal. They are going to be the rulers and you are going to be the slaves. That is the system that is being created under the guise of climate change. Okay, and the Paris Accord Agreement is all these countries agreeing to do that because they don't want to speak up against the narrative of things. So they're saying we're going to be recognizing the importance of conservation and enhancement as appropriate of sinks and reservoirs of the greenhouse gases. Again, I'll get into the greenhouse gases in a little bit. Noting the importance of ensuring the integrity of all ecosystems, including oceans, and protection of biodiversity recognized by some cultures as Mother Earth, and noting the importance for some of the concept of climate justice. Climate justice, okay? That is not a good thing right there when taking actions to address climate change. So what they're going to say is, you don't get to travel wherever you want to go. You're going to be in these little bubbles. And you don't get to go walk out in the environment. You don't get to go walk on the trails that you enjoy walking on now. You aren't going to get to walk on the beach because that is not going to be in the best interest of the environment, or that is going to be climate justice. So in order to create climate justice, we are going to confine you. We see this in other things in our society. You're going to pay for something that somebody did decades ago. You're going to do these other things. You're going to be suppressed because some other culture was suppressed 300 or 400 years ago. This stuff is insanity when you get into it. They get into say that this is about affirming the importance of education, training, public awareness, public participation, public access to information, and cooperation at all levels on the matters addressed in this agreement. So they want to educate you on what they believe is best for you. They want to train you to be complying, to be submissive, to do what they say, because that is the smart thing to do. They use that word smart a lot in things, okay? So they recognize that they've got to have these alliances. They've got to do it. They use this aspect, sustainable lifestyles. Let's consider that. Sustainable lifestyles is not about, again, working in harmony with the earth. Sustainable lifestyles is about sustaining their lifestyle, sustaining the elite lifestyle. And the only way that they can sustain the elite lifestyle and people like Gates and Soros and these different people like that, is to control the population, to control the public, to suppress their voice, to tell them what's best for them, and to not give them another choice. So you see, there are so many pieces to this, and it goes on and on. That's just a very small piece in the beginning. And it says, in enhancing the implementation of the convention, including its objective, aims to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change. Well, let's look at what's really the threat of climate change. What is the threat really about? It's not about the environment. It's not about how the earth is handling things, because Mother Nature and the earth knows how to handle things perfectly. It's about humans. It's about humans being too much to control. So they want to bring in all these narratives, all these ways to control humans. Sustainable development. What is that really about? Again, it's not about the earth. It is about only allowing so the human race to grow by a certain amount. It's about restricting who can and cannot have children. It's all these other pieces that come in that they don't tell you about in here. That sustainable development means not having more people on the face of the earth than they can control or that will buy into their narrative, which is why we are at such a risk here in America where, let's say you have half the country that doesn't want to be controlled and half that does want to be controlled. Okay, half that are going along with the narrative, and out of that, a lot of them aren't even aware of what's going on there. But that means they're looking at it saying, well, sustainable development means we need to clear out this half that doesn't support us. And then we can grow people like animals. We can grow people like food sources. They can be farmed just like any other food source to us. And right now the sustainable development, these sustainable efforts, it's about controlling the human race. It's not about the environment, because they see the human race as the threat to the environment. They don't give a damn about the environment. The only thing they care about is their power and their control and how many slaves they have to meet their needs and what they want. It's as simple as that when you get down into it. They talk about in here, again, the global temperatures, and then they go into increasing the ability to adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change and foster climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emissions development in a manner that does not threaten food production. So we already know that they're moving humans into being a food source. Gates already has that underway. They're using human meat for the faux meat instead of the cow meat. That's already been connected. I've talked about that in previous videos. And reducing the impacts, getting in here, so that what they want to do is they want to cut the population down enough to make a change without worrying about getting it down too low, because if they get it too low, then there's a shortage of human food supply. And when I say human food supply, I don't mean food for humans, I mean humans as food. And that gets into a whole lot of other things there. You get into a whole lot of other things that go down Illuminati paths, that go down other cult paths and things like that. So they don't, they're just not giving people the whole picture in this. And that's the scary part, is people think this is such a great thing. They agree to these things. They think they're supporting something good, and they're not. They go on to say that making finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. Okay, so here again, they start bringing in the finances. Now, on the surface, you would think, oh, well, this is about giving money to reduce greenhouse emissions and making the environment more resilient, more able to handle things. No, what this is about providing money to the elite funds and organizations, not to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but to create more resilience for them, to sustain them, to sustain their development. And these are the pieces they're just not telling people. And they're going to do it under this guise of, look, everybody's going to get the same thing. We're going to put you in these little cities. Everybody's going to get the same thing. It'll be all equal, blah, blah. It's not. It's not going to be equal at all. Again, you're going to have them and then everybody else. It's not about equality. It will never be about equality when they're involved, ever. It's not going to happen. We're not designed to all be the same and be exactly alike. We all have different needs and aspects. So they go into this more and more about aspects that they just keep bringing up. This is a financial thing. We got to push people to contribute. We've got to push this narrative and charge, they don't specifically say taxes, but that's how it comes about, is they use this narrative and say, well, we have to save the environment, we have to do this, we have to do that, so we got to charge you more taxes. And that's where the finances are coming in from. It's coming from you, from me, from everybody else that is not part of their little elite structure, who they make void to these things in there. And then they go on to say in here, there's aspects in here where they go on to say that those who make large contributions, who make big efforts, who really turn people around and get them on board with this and convince people to feed this narrative, will be rewarded. They'll get rewards for those doing that. You see, this is all about control. It's all about control. They talk about providing support to developing countries and how, those of us in America should be paying for other people in these aspects because we're considered a developed country. So we should help develop the technology and pay for that in the other countries instead of the countries being responsible for their own. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for helping each other out. But when you're talking and understanding what this is about, and you're talking about developing them in technology, and we know the more technology that we put into areas, we know this with the wind turbines and other things, the wind turbines are damaging the earth. The wind turbines are restructuring the cellular structure within things like crystals and gemstones and minerals and soil in the earth. And it's restructuring it. It's actually restructuring the cellular pieces within it. So these are not earth-friendly things. These are destroying the earth. Most of the so-called green initiatives that they bring out are not helping the earth. They're creating more damage to it, and I'll get into why. And plus, they're mechanical. They're technology-based, and technology-based, we're going to find out, does not favor the environment at all. And then they get into, again, protecting their interest, economic diversification plans come under this. So again, there's so much talk about getting the funding, the funding in, the finances, the money in. And what's so funny, and we see this a lot in corrupt areas. They talk about, there's such a necessity for clarity, transparency, and understanding in accordance with the decisions. Well, clarity, transparency, and understanding, first of all, they are never provide clarity. They never tell you the whole story. They're not transparent about what they're doing whatsoever. And understanding in accordance, that means we are going to make you understand through coercion. We're going to tell you what to believe, and you need to understand that we are right no matter how wrong we are. You need to understand that you should feel like crap for being a human being and for existing on the face of this earth. That's what understanding is to them. So, here again, the fluff, the words, they all sound good when you first read them until you understand what is within those words, until you understand what it is really about. And, they talk about the countries, they need to make contributions every 5 years. They're going to track them and how they're doing and what they're doing. These pieces all come up in there. Here again, they talk about there'll be positive incentives for activities relating to reducing the emissions. Well, did they give Trump any credit for reducing his emissions? No, they didn't. Now Biden's back on board, and the emissions are going back up again since he's come in. So, they're talking about positive incentives for activities relating to reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, and the role of conservation, sustainable management of forest, and enhancement of forest carbon stocks in developing countries, and alternative policy approaches such as joint mitigation and adaptation approaches for the integral and sustainable management of forests. That is what Trump was talking about when he was in office, and he was coming down on Governor Newsom, and he's like, you've got to do forest management. So, see, Trump knew he didn't have to be part of this to know what had to be done. But you didn't see them coming down on Governor Newsom with all the forest fires he was creating and how he refused to allow them to be put out and the damage that he did. They didn't hold Newsom accountable, and they didn't praise Trump for what he did. But Trump reduced the emissions. Trump was all for forest management. He knew what was being taken care of in there. He knew what needed to be taken care of in there. They talk about ensuring environmental integrity. Okay, again, this is not about the earth. Environmental integrity is about the elite circle in there. And, it's just, it kind of burns me up a little bit, really. It kind of burns me up a little bit to see all these lies out there, and I really hope that we can start to bust the bubble on some of these lies that they've been promoting and how they use this and how they twist it and distort it to control people. And, these aspects that, how they just, it's all about all of this control. And I think that, I could go on and on in different pieces, and I was trying to just kind of see if there was something else that I had spotted in all of this. But I think that that's kind of a big piece, and you're kind of getting the idea. And I'll put the link to where you can go in and you can read the actual agreement yourself, and you can see this wording that's in there. But let's talk a little bit about this global warming aspect that they want us to believe. And this comes off of the EPA.gov. So I'm using it. And there's times where you want to use the corrupt sites, and there's times that you don't. When you really, want to get to the truth of a lot of things, you want to kind of branch out into the fact people. But sometimes you want to go on to even some of the corrupt areas, and the EPA, they can fluctuate around. They're kind of like the CDC. Sometimes you get some good information, sometimes you don't get some good information, but sometimes you want to use their measurements so that you can bring it back into reality and run this checkpoint on it. So your greenhouse gases, what they basically are considered to do is to warm the earth by absorbing energy. and slowing the rate at which energy escapes from the space. And so it's they refer to it as being like a blanket that insulates the Earth. Okay, and then you've got these different types of greenhouse gases that can have different effects on the Earth's warming, that can make it warmer or less warmer. Okay, and again, I encourage you to go and look at the video that shows global warming as a hoax. That really explains that it's nothing more than nature. We're really not. There's times the Earth warms, there's times that it does. And it did this even before technology, even before other things. This is just a natural part of its cycle. So, but again, they saw these opportunities and, to capitalize and control people through this. So they have different effects on the warming, and the two key ways that they differ from each other is in their ability to absorb energy. So that means their radiative efficiency, which is how long they can stay in the atmosphere, which is like their lifetime, how long they'll stay in the air, how much they stay in the atmosphere. And then you've got the global warming potential. That was developed to provide comparisons of the global warming impacts of different types of gases. So how much impact that they would have on the environment. And specifically, it's a measure of how much energy the emissions of a 1 ton of gas will absorb over a certain period of time. And that is relative to the emissions of 1 ton of carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is a natural part of our environment. And we'll get into that in just a moment. So the larger the GWP, the global warming potential, the more that a given gas warms the Earth compared to CO2 over the same time period. And the time period usually used for GWPs is about 100 years. So they provide this kind of common unit of measure is what it is. So you've got CO2, you've got 4 key kinds of gases that are involved. You've got CO2, which has a GWP of 1, regardless of the time period that's used, because it's the gas that's being used as a reference point. And it remains in the climate system for, it could remain in the climate system for a very long time. So it gives it a good base measure to work from. And the emissions cause increases in the atmospheric concentrations that'll last up to thousands of years, which sounds scary on the surface, but again, it's really not when you're looking at it as a part of nature in there. Now you've got methane gas, which is estimated to have a GWP of 28 to 36 over 100 years. So that's many times over the carbon dioxide or the carbon CO2 factor that's in there. It lasts about a decade on average, so you got about a 10-year period on that. And it absorbs a lot more energy. Again, we look at it 28 to 36 times over carbon in there. And the net effect of the shorter lifetime and higher energy is, absorption is then reflected in that GWP. So if you've got carbon at a GWP of 1, and then you've got methane at a GWP of 28 to 36. Now remember, it gets bigger and bigger, the stronger the effect is. And then you've got nitrous oxide, which has a GWP of 265 to 298 times that of carbon, and it remains on average in the atmosphere for 100 years. And then you've got chlorofluorocarbons, hydroxyfluorocarbons, hydrochlorofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride. And they're sometimes called high GWP gases because for a given amount of mass, they trap a lot more heat than the CO2. So this is going to be important. And this grouping, their gases can be in the tens of thousands over carbon. So this is where they like to kind of distort things. And the funny thing is that the information is all right here. So when we first look at this, we've got an overview, and people first look at a grid and they go, oh, carbon dioxide makes up 81% of the gases, the greenhouse gases. But just because it makes up 81% does not mean that it is the damaging force that is creating it. Again, it's the GWP. So your fluorinated gases only make up 3%, but their damaging factor is way over the other. So just because they're 3% doesn't mean that they are less of an impact on our environment. This is like saying you have proteins and carbohydrates and, these different nutrients, and they make up a different percentages. Well, just because you have 80% of your diet being fruits and vegetables doesn't mean that fruits and vegetables is the damaging part of your diet. Okay, so this is where we have to really look and put things into perspective. Just because carbon dioxide makes up 81% of the greenhouse gases doesn't mean that they are the damaging factor to our environment. And that's a little hard for some people to wrap their brains around. Okay, so carbon dioxide, that CO2, enters the atmosphere through burning of fossil fuels such as coal, natural gas, and oil. So you see these environmentalists, this Paris Accord climate, all of this stuff, the globalists, they want to come down and say, oh, look, because carbon dioxide is 81%, and that comes from coal and natural gas and oil, well, we got to stop fracking, we got to stop this, we got to stop natural gas, we got to go to electric vehicles, we can't have gas-run vehicles. Totally distorted when you get down to it. Completely distorted. It also includes solid waste, trees, biological materials. So, forest fires, again, that's a natural part of the environment sustaining itself. It's part of its cycle. Should we go out and burn trees? Well, no, we shouldn't. But we also want to consider that wood burning was the natural way to stay warm long before we ever had an environmental issue. So if tree burning and natural resources was really the issue, our Earth probably wouldn't exist by global warming standards or climate change standards. In there, we wouldn't even be in existence right now, which is another reason why it's really a bunch of crock in so many ways. Your methane gases, remember that was the next one up, around 28 to 36 times the carbon dioxide, comes from the production and transport of coal, natural gas, and oil. So actually the production and the transport of it is more damaging than say burning it for fuel sources, for heating or things like that in there. They also talk about methane coming from livestock. Well, if it's coming from livestock, it's also coming from humans, because that's basically what they're talking about. That's what happens when you pass gas from your butt. Okay, and other agricultural practices by the decay and organic waste and things like that. So the poop from any animal on the face of this earth. So again, this is really still part of nature, and not necessarily damaging in the way that we've been told that it's damaging. It actually has a, not such a big impact. It only makes up 10% of the gases to start with, and it's not a high GWP, higher than carbon dioxide, but not high compared to some of the other things. Then you have nitrous oxide, and that's emitted during cultural during agricultural and industrial activities. So that's the combustion of fossil fuels and solid waste. So that's something that would be used, for example, in treatment of wastewater. Our wastewater facilities, our industrial factories, things like that, they're emitting a lot more. So big corporations. So if you really want to come down on things, don't come down on the individual person who's organically farming. You need to come down on big corporations, big factories in things. Fluorinated gases, which we know are the most damaging, tens of 1,000 times over carbon dioxide. Okay, now those sources are things that affect, like, they're ozone depleting. They're considered ozone depleting in there. And these are normally chemical things. These are, things that are coming from man-made technology things. And I'll get into that in a minute. But, so really our man-made things are the most damaging things of this. And when we get into these factors, again, let's look at some of the aspects of carbon dioxide emissions. Carbon dioxide, we're not that worried about it because it's connected to transportation, it's connected to electricity, and it's connected to industry in there. So again, if we're looking at this aspect, we can use more of these natural resources, the gas and the fuels and things like that, without impacting the environment as much, while providing jobs for people, and still have our electricity and have solid and stable forms of electricity, for example, in there. But again, it only has a global warming potential of 1. That's it, just 1. Then you get into methane, and your methane emissions have a global warming potential of around 25. So 25 to 36, so they've got a range, it varies in there, and that accounts for 9.5% of things. And again, this is your agricultural, it's your livestock, it's the digestive processes, the gases that come out of that, the gases that could be even coming out of composting or things like that. I mean, you're going to get a certain amount of gases out of composting. So, this type of thing, again, it's not a high aspect. You'll see the composting bins, they actually separate out the methane gas depending on composting units that you have. It's connected to our landfills. Methane comes off the landfills as the waste and things are decomposing, the wastewater treatment in there. So still not a bad gas, but let's jump over here to those fluorinated gases and take a look. And again, we're talking tens of thousands on the global warming potential. You're talking 14,800, 12,200, 17,200, 22,800, depending on which one of those fluorinated gases you're dealing with. So you compare that to 1 for carbon. Huge difference in there. So really, what is these components that are creating fluorinated gases? Because if you're going to reduce global warming, so to say, or make a change in the climate, you're not going to be looking at these fluorinated gas emissions. So where do they come from? Refrigerants, like in your refrigerator, like in your air conditioning, things that cool things, AC systems, aerosol propellants. First thing that comes to mind is the chemicals that they spray in the air. Chemtrails. That is ozone depleting. So they're going through spraying ozone depleting stuff. The pesticides that are used, foam blowing agents, you've got that spray foam stuff. That's ozone depleting. Solvents, fire retardants. So, what did they do a couple of decades back? Oh, you got to have all your furniture in fire retardant thing. They're doing it on clothing now, fire retardant things. All of these things that they've convinced you and sold you into, and they're actually some of the most damaging things to the environment that we have. Let's go on in this. What else? Air conditioning systems in vehicles and buildings, chemicals, pretty much all of your chemical products that, are in there. So are they trying to reduce the chemical products? No, they're not in the Paris Climate Agreement. They're not doing that. They're trying to come down on the least damaging sources of things. You've got manufacturing processes through leaks, servicing, disposal of equipment in there. You're talking your electronics. You're talking computer equipment. You're talking television systems. Anything with electrical transmission equipment. So your circuit breakers. The circuit breaker in your house, for example. The circuit breakers out on the power poles that transmit the electricity. So think about that for a minute, because that means they're trying to set up the electrical grid. That's only going to destroy the universe. That's only going to destroy, that's what's going to destroy the earth. All of these cell phones, all of these laser technology, all of these AI technologies. So when you talk about Paris climate and they want us to fund putting electrical equipment into these countries that are not as developed, they are actually asking us to fund the destruction of the earth instead of help the earth, is what's happening in this situation. They are wanting us to increase the damage. When you look at 5G technology and what is going on with that, instead of having power poles that are long distances away, which you can do with the lower frequencies in there, they want to put them like at every house. In some areas, in some countries, they're putting things on like every house, every apartment building, things like this. And then they want to put people in these cities where all this electrical stuff is going to be, it's like you're going to be locked into radiation in there. So the more electrical stuff they bring out, whether you're talking digital currencies, whether you're talking electronics, think of all the people that have Alexa and cell phones and TVs in every room for the kids, and you've got multiple big giant TVs, and you've got, computer equipment and all of these different things. And you go into a store and you think of all the electrical stuff that is in a big box store, for example. Okay, and then all the transmission, and then you want to put in 5G and increase those transmitters. So you're going to add all of these things that are going to destroy the environment in the name of saving the environment. Does that really make any sense? It doesn't make any sense at all. None. So they're telling you that you've got to spend all this money to fund things that are actually going to destroy the environment. And they're giving you the propaganda to make you believe that you're helping the environment. It's insanity. And this is going by their own standards, their own rules, their own regulations and things. If we want to reduce the greenhouse emissions, then we need to get off of electronics. We need to step away from electronics. And what happens when we do that? We're not as controllable. Critical thinking comes back. Free thinking comes back. Communication face-to-face comes back. The less time you are in front of a computer and on a cell phone, on these things, the more disconnected you are from electronics, the more your health goes up. It's a natural thing. This is why I unplug my electronics at night. I don't leave things plugged in. So when you look at what this Paris Climate Accord is doing, it's about tracking, it's about control, it is about them dictating what is best for you, it's about removing resistance from those that don't want to support them being in the elite people like the Gates and the Soros and other people and the banking families and the cartels being in control of the world. And electronics is the way they're going to get it, more control. So we really have to think about this. This is why it's so important to go in and do your own research. This is why it's so important to understand the truth behind things and not just accept what somebody is telling you, not just accept the propaganda pieces that are there in it. So that's really, really important. I wanted to get that up, and hopefully this clarifies things. And this is why Trump didn't want to be a part of this climate agreement, because it's just a waste of money. We don't need to put our money into that. We can put our money into people. We can put our money into small businesses. We can put our money into supporting our own country. And we don't need a committee for that. We can all operate responsibly. Okay? We don't need an agreement to support elite narratives. And that's why he stepped out of it. And that's why it's been such a danger for Biden to step back into it, because all it's going to mean is increase in taxes, more damage to our environment. Now let's take a look at the codes really quick on some of this. The Paris Climate Accord, and let me just get in here. The Paris Climate Accord is about controlling the narrative. The codes actually place us in a victim abuser pattern, and it is designed to turn people against those that don't want to buy their lies or support them. It's something that will be used in that way, and they will manipulate and guilt people and control them through coercion in order to make this happen. And this was created in 2015. So this, this was created in Obama administration. They were very on board with that. And it was created under a code energy pattern of division, of separation. And we know that this is not in soul alignment. And being created on that day, in particular, is about keeping people from learning from history, from the past, seeing the truth of nature's cycles. It's about blocking success for the average human and creating success for the elite. Climate change is about creating disruption. It's about creating war. It's about creating battle. So you see, it's about finding out who the rebels are. It's about making people fight against each other. Global warming, which was the terminology they used prior to climate change, was about control. That runs on code patterns of control and world domination. Sustainable development is not about the soul and the spirit. It's about materialism and greed when you look at the code patterns. So what do we do with this? What we do is we come into personal responsibility and accountability. We reduce our electronics usage. We say no to some of the things like 5G, and that's a touchy area because there are certain advancements that we'd like to bring into our Earth, but we're really going to have to weigh out if those advancements are worth it to us. Because a lot of those advancements that need 5G to run, they're really not things that we need. They're not really things that are going to benefit us, and they will create destruction on this earth. And when you start to break down Mother Nature is going to reclaim herself. And that probably means wiping out people. It probably means wiping out the human race. So if we reduce that thing, take batteries out of, for example, your cell phones, take the batteries out, unplug them when they're not in use, these sorts of things. This will all help. Think of anything in your electronics, anything electrical, anything that is technology based in particular, You know, not all electricity is, you know, synthetic stuff, but think of your technology in particular and minimize that. And that's where we start as the individual. That's our greatest usage. And, you know, thinking about maybe where can I, you know, make one trip instead of 3 trips. Maybe I spend one day out instead of 3 days, and I maximize my time in there. And this is where the cryptocurrency and the digital currency comes in. And the big upheaval, and people say, oh, everybody's trying to steer people away from cryptocurrency and stuff like that. And you've got two sides of the same coin, is the way I look at it. Okay? Neither are going to benefit humanity in the long run. What's happening with cryptocurrency is it's decentralizing the digital currency. So digital currency, they claim it's safer because of the technology behind it. But it turns into a central control. So again, your elite are controlling everything, and they really want to go to a digital currency. This is their goal. This is part of the Great Reset. Cryptocurrency decentralizes it. But we have to remember that cryptocurrency is still in many ways like a digital currency. It's not as safe, it's not as secure, which means it's easy to hack, it's easy to get in there, it's easy to wipe everything out on you. It's still not a tangible asset. And both of these run on technology. Both of them require a lot of technological equipment. Both of them require heavy power grids to operate on. Both of them are going to contribute to the destruction of our Earth. And in the long run, we don't have power, because it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with cryptocurrency or digital currency. It only takes one little slip, one little button pushed, and it's all wiped out and you have nothing there. This is not in soul alignment. Neither one of them is. Centralized or decentralized, this currency is warned about in many, many prophecies. It is warned about in many places. And it is not the currency that we want to be on. Am I saying it's totally wrong? No. Could we have aspects of it? Yes. But if you want to get down to looking at it from an environmental perspective, from an aspect of perspective, they'll say, oh, well, you're not printing money then, so, you know, that's not doing the damage. But the digital aspects, again, the electronics are so damaging to our Earth. One GWP of 1 or GWP of 14,000. Big difference there. So we really have to look at what we're supporting. Now, the next aspect that I want to get into, because it plays into this, and this is used not just in things like the Paris Climate Accord, but we're going to see it used more and more and more as these agendas are trying to be put into place, because they don't want you to know what they're really up to, otherwise you'd never consent. And this is this factor of control without consent, also known as coercion, okay? And when we get into looking at this, there's a great website out there, which is openmindsfoundation.org, and they are full of information that you could delve into like crazy on here that explains so much, and they have resources to help you, and they have reading material. And the people that actually put this organization together, it started back in 2015, have been under heavy cult programming in the past. They have, for the most part, experiences in these different mind control methods that are used, and cult tactics and aspects of reprogramming people's minds, re-educating them, using this coercion and how it is. And they get into all the different areas that it is put into. But to give you a little idea, for example, let's just do an overview of some of what they've got right here on their website, which is coercion can also be referred to as coercive control. And this is the act of manipulating an individual or group to act against their best interest using violence, threats, intimidation, or psychological techniques. It is usually a gradual process over a period of time in which people's behaviors change, many beyond recognition. Coercion or coercive control are the common terms for it, but legally it is known as undue influence, or you might be more familiar with thought reform, brainwashing, and mind control. So, this is really an aspect of, and they do this a lot. They do this a lot, like with Paris climate control and New Green Deal and all of these green initiatives, like, they get you to sign on to these things when it's not in your best interest through these different tactics, and oftentimes using threats. Well, if you don't sign into this, if you don't start doing this environmental piece, then we only have 10 years to live. That's a common narrative in there. So that's a threat. Well, you don't want everybody to die, do you? So wear a mask. Okay, this is coercion. This is the tactics that the CCP uses. This is the tactics that the globalists, the elitist, all of these, the Marxist, all of these different groups use. Religions use this. Politics use this. Okay, so you're working really against your best interest, and a lot of times you don't even know it because it's been so slow fed to you along the way that you don't even see the change. You don't even see the change until at some point you go, oh my gosh, this is not right, or some catastrophic thing happens. So why is it dangerous? In short, the danger is threefold. It's emotional, it's physical, and financial danger to the individual being coerced. Danger and impact on the family and friends of the individual, and cost to society in support of the individuals. So you take something like the Paris Climate Accord or Green New Deals or things like this, okay, or Agenda 2030. What's the cost? Your freedom, your life, your ability to think for yourself, your ability to have any choices. There's huge, huge cost involved. And for what? To destroy the environment more, not to help it. So globally, more than 800 million people are being coerced. I think it's way higher than this. They say this means more than 10% of the worldwide population are being coerced. I think it's way higher than that, honestly. When I look around, I think we're actually talking more in the 30 percentile range, 40 percentile range. Most of them, they don't even know it. They don't know it. I think maybe 10% know that they're being coerced. But I think we got a much bigger group that's being coerced on much more subtle levels than this. How and why does it happen? Okay, this is kind of an interesting read. Our ancestral environment required quick reactionary instincts, so we tend to respond automatically in a situation. And in doing so, we form these blind spots where we omit information we feel is irrelevant. The brain then fills in material to help make sense of what we are seeing. We focus on what we have seen before, what we expect to see, or what we want to see. It's why magic tricks and illusions work so well. And isn't that really what we're dealing with when we talk about these things? It's all illusions. They're creating illusions. Once we have established an idea or expectation, we then hold on to it stubbornly, and consistent patterns of behavior help make us feel comfortable, right? We've seen this through the pandemic, where people stubbornly hold on to something. They don't want to look at the facts. They don't want to look at the truth of something. In everyday activities, this is not a major problem. However, it leaves us vulnerable to manipulators who can build on our assumptions and behaviors to convince us of new beliefs over time. And this is what we've seen with the pandemic, right? You can't talk to people. You can't get within 6 feet. You can't do this. You can't do that. Okay? They've created these new beliefs, these new ways of thinking through repetition is what it's about. The human mind is predisposed to social influence and it tends to choose the path of least resistance. This is why so many people comply to like mask mandates. Instead of questioning them, it's like, well, I just won't resist. I just don't want to be in an argument. I just don't want, so they just comply. And this is what the elite, this is what the corrupt structures bank on. They bank on you saying, I just don't want to fight it. I just don't have the energy. I just don't, it's path of least resistance. Behaving spontaneously and not considering all of the options. So they bank on you not going and looking at the truth. But what happened when people started to look at the truth? What happened? They started censoring them, right? No, don't go do that. You need to just comply. That's the path of least resistance. So this is particularly true of teenagers whose brains are not fully developed until after 20 years of age. It is this which leaves us open to manipulation either by someone intent on influencing our lives or a group intent on indoctrinating individuals for their own gain. Unfortunately, the majority of victims of coercion are just like you and me, believing they will always make informed choices and can never be tricked into giving away their independence. We are seeing this right here and now. This is massively playing out in our world right now. They are usually unaware of the manipulation that is happening and how or why their situations have changed. People are just turning it over. They're allowing the changes to happen without questioning them. This is why a lot of the human trafficking happens in teenagers. Because they're not thinking completely. Their brains literally are not developed completely. And they bank on that. And this is why they will support us in having all this toxic food, right? All of the sugars and the candies and the junk food and the fried foods and all of these things, because it dumbs our brain down to where we're susceptible. This is why alcohol stores were allowed to be open when other stores weren't allowed to be open. Because it numbs your brain down to where you're susceptible to all of the programming. Yeah, drink some more, because now I can program your brain some more. Okay? I'm not against anybody having a drink here or there. I'm just saying this is how they get it through. Okay? The only way to combat coercion is through education, teaching people critical thinking skills, and intelligent disobedience. Okay, intelligent disobedience is not the same as rebellion. That means not being willing to go along with a narrative that is damaging to yourself, the earth, other things. That means questioning what you're being told. Intelligent disobedience is saying, I'm not going to wear a mask because it's unhealthy for me, because there's no facts to support it. There's no, anything there. That's intelligent disobedience, which helps them to question what they see, know, and believe to be true. So always, always, always questioning. Any of these cult mindsets, whether you're talking religion, politics, narratives, any of it, they don't want you to question any of it. Don't question it, just follow me, just comply. Okay? This is why the Code Journey is always saying, question it, think about it. It puts your mind in a critical thinking space. It asks you to ask questions and to probe and to use your mind. So this makes it harder for manipulators to influence people. This is why they don't want people thinking for themselves. This is why they don't want you researching the internet. This is why they don't want you comparing information. Because you can't be controlled if you get the true information. What are its other forms? Okay. The effects of coercion, they're widespread in our world. They're in so many different areas. They're underpinning pretty much everything from domestic violence, gang behaviors, human trafficking, radicalization, like Antifa groups, radicalization into terrorist groups. That's what we saw with Antifa, BLM movements, things like that. And they've got more information on it and how to spot it. You know, it's really hard because it's different in every situation. It's coming through all these different forms and subtle areas, and there's no like one specific definitive list like A, B, C, D, you know, like you do with the symptoms and then you diagnose a health issue, because there's all these varying layers depending on the type that it is, the duration, the severity of that coercion. There are some common factors that can be used. You know, people are reluctant to answer simple questions, constant deference to an individual or a group or giving up. How many times do we hear that in our current press secretary, right? Jen Psaki? And she's constantly, oh, let me circle back on you. Oh, go ask this group. Go ask that group. That's the deference to other people. That right there is showing you there's coercion going on. She doesn't want to answer questions, except the ones that will feed the narrative, okay, that were previous important. On the site, they've got a whole glossary of terms in here you can look at. It gets into authoritarianism, the black and white thinking, which is what's used to create the race wars, coercive control. It's an act or pattern of acts of assault, threats, humiliation, intimidation, and other abuse that is used to harm, punish, or frighten a victim. This has been massively used in the pandemic. This has been massively used by Fauci and other people that have been pushing these things. Authoritarianism is the enforcement or advocacy of strict obedience to authority at the expense of personal freedom. That's what the mask mandates are. They're authoritarianism. Black and white thinking, it's good, it's evil, it's this, there's no middle ground. You're either with us or you're not with us. That was stated by Kamala Harris. Okay, that's black and white thinking. Cognitive dissonance, which is the uncomfortable feeling that occurs when a person's strong core beliefs are questioned by somebody who presents evidence that contradicts those beliefs. Unable to accept the evidence, the person will then seek to rationalize, ignore, or even deny the evidence as it does not fit their core belief. So when the evidence came out about hydroxy stuff, about natural treatments, about using vitamin D, the media shut it down. That was cognitive dissonance that was happening there. Confirmation bias, a tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information that confirms or strengthens prior personal beliefs or hypothesis. So that's where the fake science comes in when we're looking at things. Intelligent disobedience is about doing the right thing when what you're told to do is wrong. So that would be, for example, somebody that doesn't wear a mask and they're told that not wearing a mask is wrong, but it's actually the right thing, based on facts, based on a lot of things. So that's intelligent disobedience that we're seeing there, okay? Logical fallacies, which is an error, flaw in reasoning that renders an argument invalid, an argument in which a conclusion doesn't follow logically from what preceded it. So they give some examples of that, misrepresenting someone's argument and then attacking the distorted argument. An argument where a person is attacked and not the content of their point of view. And you see this a lot on the social media sites. Oh, you're stupid. Oh, you're this. Oh, you're that. And it's not, they don't even address the issue. The slippery slope range is an argument, is when someone asserts that a relatively small first step leads to a chain of related events, culminating in a big significant event. We see that with climate stuff. We see that with a lot of different things. And then they've got thought reform in here and how that works, and personal autonomy. And this is the ability to, have self-determination, being able to make your own choices regarding the direction of your actions, including the freedom to pursue those choices. And it requires the absence of restraining forces. So when you look at everything that the last year has been about in the lockdowns and the shutdowns and the mandates and all of these things, it's about squashing personal autonomy. And this again comes back to control. If we squash personal autonomy, then that creates control. And then undue influence, which is again influencing somebody to do something that they know isn't right, that's against their will. There's some sort of threat oftentimes involved. They get into showing all the different areas that this goes into and that this covers. So you have, who uses these different threats and who are the manipulative groups that are implementing these things. You have religious cults, you have political cults, both left and right-wing groups, race supremacists, terrorists, other hate groups that have political agendas are in there, therapy cults, educational cults, internet cults, corporate cults, marketing cults, family and one-on-one cults. That's one that a lot of people don't even think about. Criminal gangs, exploitation in the name of God, which is, fringes on different religious tradition that manipulate their members deliberately to keep them in subservience. So a lot of, when you look at all these things, it's about subservience, it's about control, it's about, these aspects. And then you've got in exploitation factors and the techniques that they use to do this coercion. You have alienation. Okay, well, there's your lockdowns and your shutdowns. They created alienation, brainwashing, systemic use of mental and behavioral techniques intended to overwhelm the individual thought and create obedience, also called mind control, manipulation, thought reform. This was used when they brought the mask out, the coercion factor, exploitation, using someone selfishly. So like we saw this with the BLM movements and things like that. They were exploiting races, exploiting certain groups of people, fervor induction, that there are forms of manipulation that do not rely on threats or other methods of coercion, but they're predators, often attract people by helping them attain some sort of peak experience, an euphoria type of thing, an awe, an ecstasy. This is something that you might see used more like by your pedophiles or your human trafficking people, things like that. And so they get you to lose your rational thinking through some sort of euphoric type of state. Hypnosis, indoctrination, manipulation, mind control, religious extremism, propaganda. That's a big thing that we've had out in our media right now. And the propaganda is a manipulative use of public relations. So our media, often called a spin, where there's an attempt to deceive the audience, whether for political or advertising reasons. That's at work, and most of our mainstream news sources and key sources are there. And when they can't spin it anymore, what they do is they then try to alleviate those trying to talk the truth. And we're seeing that right now, right? They're trying to alleviate all the alternative truth-based news sources that are out there. Radicalization, religious extremism, thought reform, undue influence, and then the totalitarianism, which is a system that demands complete submission. And that's what they have been trying to implement through this whole pandemic aspect, is this totalitarianism. It's a complete submission to a government or organization, which is, our corrupt government, our elitist, our globalist, people like Gates, these types of things. They want total submission, totally submit to your government. And yet Trump was saying, no, you need to have freedom. You need to make your own choices. We got to put the power in the hands of the people. So this word was originally described the Nazi movement in Germany, but it also applies to groups controlled by authoritarian leaders. So when you look at these corrupt structures in our governments, for example, and they use gangs and they use cults to do their bidding on things. and it includes the destructive cults and gangs. And it can even be a relationship where one partner has all the power. That can also be considered totalitarian in there. So it's a very big thing that has played out in our world lately. Like I said, it's really worth coming in here and delving into these things. And, people wanted to, the media spin was that Trump was the Nazi, Trump was this, dictator. But everything he was doing was removing the dictator structure. It was going up against the dictator structure, and those who are working against them are the ones that are working in this totalitarian aspect there. And so, it's really interesting. They get into looking at some examples of different aspects. Again, you can come in and read this. The Mussolini's fascist movement, that happened in 1926, and that was a political philosophy where a centralized state outlaws all opposition and demands complete subservience of the population. That is happening since Biden stepped into office. They are outlawing all opposition. This is what they're doing to news sources like OANN, Newsmax, and these other groups. Nope, we're going to outlaw you. You have to stop broadcasting this because we're demanding total subservience of the population. That's the fascism. That's, it's not just it's not just right wing or anything. This is an opposition to true democracy. And, we're seeing this in a lot of our political aspects right now. And this is where the leader makes all the decisions. And that's what Biden's been doing. I'm just going to make the decision. And everybody has to follow it. He's the one that's actually operating as a dictator and a tyrant. Hitler's One People movement, and that, came through. It was a totalitarian regime in Western Europe. It ended with the death of General Franco in 1975. Who ruled Spain and its colonies for almost 40 years as a totalitarian fascist dictator. So we oftentimes see this aspect in our communist countries, even our Marxist societies. Marxist ideas are all based on this aspect of dictatorship and totalitarian. And then totalism is contraction of totalitarianism, and this kind of extends beyond the state of totalitarianism to all authoritarian relationships, and it means to demand control. So again, we see this playing out all over our world, particularly here in America. It describes dictatorship in many different forms. Whether that's politics, religion, business, therapy, and of course, our political leaders right now are trying to take over all of those areas. And then we have the Lifton's model, which is a basic model used by many in the counter-cult world to understand the submission to irrational ideas and antisocial practices that define destructive cult groups. So there's a lot of things. Again, this site is incredible. It's openmindsfoundation.org. I'll put the links in my notes for you so that you have them. And just to give you the code perspective on this, coercion from a code perspective is about teaching somebody how to be successful through using power to move them in a direction that you want them to go. It's to teach them your own ways versus teaching somebody to think for themselves and to find their own path. So coercion is kind of a distorted aspect of the teacher, student, mentor aspect. So in its true and pure form, we would have, on this code pattern, we would have a mentor capacity going on. In the distorted form, in the way coercion is, we have an aspect of mentoring into corruption or gaining compliance and placing success as the reward for compliance on this. Totalitarianism runs on the same code pattern. So it's very interesting when we look at that. It's literally about grooming. It's literally about grooming people into the corrupt success, or grooming people to realize that success means becoming the elite in our culture and our society. So when we look at that aspect, the ways that we handle this, or that we can offset these aspects of coercion, is the free thinking. It's teaching people to think for themselves, to make their own decisions, to use facts, to use logical processes, to question things, to find their own way, to not repeat or to comply automatically with people, to always be in choice, and to find those people that can help you think for yourself and not think just what you're told to think. So I really hope that this has been a powerful video for you. I really hope that it has given you a lot to think about and has opened maybe some great doors for you to consider when you're seeing these agreements out there, when you're seeing these things talked about in the news, when you are hearing these initiatives, because we're going to be hearing a lot more about environmental things coming up and how we have to make these changes for the environment. And again, when you look at the changes they want to make in culture and society, they want to move things to electrical vehicles, more technology, more gadgets, more electronics. And this is counter what they claim they are doing. This is destroying the environment. And this whole AI system, I'm not saying they don't have their place or their value or things like that, but I'm saying we need to reduce the usage there. We need to pay attention to things. So with that, I'm going to close this out, and I will come back to you next month, hopefully with more great, insightful information for you to work with. And we will go from there, and we'll take another big topic, and we'll see what we can look at it, and we'll see how the codes are lining up with things that are happening in the world and in our life, and showing us those deeper layers in there, and realizing that these factors of coercion, these factors of, the climate change aspect is really teaching us how to be self-destructive. When we combine these different pieces, when you bring coercion into climate change, it's about upheaval. It's about upheaving people's lives, keeping them in trauma, keeping them in devastation, and getting them to turn over their control while they're in this fragmented, disoriented state that they can't think for themselves in. And that's why we have to keep bringing people back into that clarity of mind. I'll be back with you next month with another Connecting Codes video. Don't forget to check out my regular channels as well, where I put up a little more practical spirituality concepts, addressing things from a code perspective, in different perspectives, and that's under my own name. You can check those out at Jessie Ann Nichols George, and connect with me on social media. I'm around a lot of different areas these days. Some of the traditional ones, I'm trying to hang on to those where I've got a lot of connections in Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, areas like that. But I'm also on some of the alternative platforms like Gab and Parler and Safe Chat and Clout Hub, which are the ones that I have found are truly operating in integrity and not just claiming free speech platforms. They seem to be the ones that will be strong enough to be able to be sustained through the different areas. So there's lots of places you can find me, and I wish everybody a great month, and I will see you next month. Take care.